On this episode of Physically Spiritual, I talk with Jeff Mazzone. We discuss his journey to becoming a Catholic counselor, the Catholic psychiatrists Terruwe and Conrad Baars, their integration of the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas with the psychology of their time, the basic human need for affirmation, the controversy around mortification therapy, and how to experience healing in everyday life. If you want to support the show, like and share the episode and subscribe to the podcast. You can go to physicallyspiritual.com to become a patron or becominggift.com to subscribe to my Substack. I'm your host, Andrew Reinhardt. Jeff Mazzone, welcome to Physically Spiritual.
Thanks, Andrew. Happy to be here, brother.
So you're a Catholic therapist. You are passionate about the work of a couple Catholic psychiatrists, Conrad Baars and Terruwe, and you're also on the board of the Catholic Psychotherapy Association. What did the Lord do in your life to bring you to this?
Yeah, great question right out of the gates. I'm an only child from parents who divorced when I was 10. And for the longest time, that was my identity. And as I went through high school, trying to find that identity, growing up in Southern Maryland, an identity that wasn't just that, I was still very active at our parish, though not particularly faithful, but just still altar serving for some reason as a high school kid. One summer, my pastor invited me to go on a come and see retreat for the diocese, the Archdiocese of Washington. And I went and I met all of these young adult men, newly ordained priests, young priests, seminarians. And it was the first time that I had ever felt myself affirmed by a man. And I just wanted all of it. And so I began to cultivate this greater openness to becoming a priest. And it had, of course, I want to serve and I want to give and I want to lead people in worship and I want to help heal and help make people holy and grow. But my faith life hadn't really been there yet. And so I applied and I entered the seminary and I kind of went through college seminary for the Archdiocese, but yet really still hadn't known Jesus and certainly didn't know God the Father. And then I met this crazy, ridiculous religious order when I was still in seminary in New York, Franciscan Friars, the Renewal, the CFRs. And these guys were just the next level for me of men who had all of the same qualities, but a joy that I'd never seen before. And it was the same thing. I want that. And the thing that happened was seminarians, priests, friars, their affirming me as being good was something that was not an experience I had had. And I just wanted to be with them and like them. And the fact that they wanted me poured so much into my spirit, soul, heart, and mind. I want to follow that. But all the while, never really getting to the core of, well, who am I, right? And so putting on this false identity. I can put on a cassock, I can put on a habit, I can do all the things, I can be this great friar, but deep down, just this broken, poor, insecure child being asked to do some pretty adult things, pretty much giving something that I didn't have. And I pushed through my first couple of years as a friar, made temporary vows, and one day at the friary, I had a panic attack. And I crumbled. And around this time, the community had met a Catholic psychologist who specialized in treating priests and religious with some methods that we're going to get into here pretty soon. And I started seeing her, ended up leaving the friars, saw her for about 2 years. And at the end of that counseling process, which really was just the beginning for me, and this is 2010. And at the end of that counseling, she said, one day, not yet, because you still have much to learn and many ways in which you need to grow and mature. But one day you're going to become a mental health professional. And let me know when that day comes. Fast forward 10 years, I'm sending in my applications to schools. And she wrote my letter of recommendation. And I entered Liberty University virtually while living in New York in 2019. Had an amazing experience there as a Catholic at an evangelical non-denominational school. Graduated, started residency, completed residency about a year ago, and now I'm in my own private practice with a colleague here in Fredericksburg, Virginia.
Thanks for that. I can relate to your story a lot. We were actually in seminary around the same time.
That's right.
And I can relate to that that split, like feeling like I don't fit here, or what I see on the outsides of others is different what I feel on the inside of me, and kind of becoming that person, like projecting who you think you're supposed to be versus just acting authentically out of the self. So what about that particular counseling experience was so transformative? Had you been in counseling prior to that, would be one question. And then two, how did that experience with that Catholic counselor transform you?
So no, I had not been in counseling before, apart from maybe a few sessions when I was 11 years old, around the time that my parents divorced. Uh, what was transformative about that experience? Well, many things on many different levels, but at the end of the day, it was the transforming power of an affirming relationship. It was really my first encounter consistently of being completely loved, and not just being told things that I want to be told, or, compliments, or those things. I mean, just seen and known through and through, and radically loved and challenged. It was as if I went through like a psychological rebirth. And with this clinician, I went through all the stages of human development again. And at every stage, I was met with unconditional love. If you think about attachment theory, like all of those things were provided. And those things developmentally are necessary to help a person get to the next stage. And so it was this organic process. I wasn't like, okay, today you're going to be reborn, and then in 2 weeks you're going to be age 5. Like, it just kind of happened. As with each stage of kind of emotional redevelopment, I was met with love and safety and security that gave me confidence to kind of progress to the next stage, where I think those things would have been missed for me historically, right? The first go around. And so at the end of all of that, obviously I had this great attachment to my mental health professional. And at the end of it, as all of that kind of wrapped up, the send off was like, okay, now God the Father needs to become the primary affirmer of your being. And I've been in that place ever since, of trying to make that happen so that I can really be transformed from glory into glory, right? And to really fulfill the end for which you and I are created, right? Which is to love.
So you mentioned that experience of, I guess, use like a more contemporary term, like acceptance, or or to borrow a different term, like unconditional positive regard, maybe, not to like mingle
Yeah, right.
terms from different approaches.
Carl
Um,
Rogers here.
uh, but you'd mentioned, that she was applying certain ideas from, I'm guessing, Dr. Conrad Baars and Anna Terruwe.
Mhm.
Um, and I was wondering, could you maybe share just a little bit about those two Catholic psychiatrists, and then how that came through in that counseling experience you had?
Sure. And I'm going to speak to you mentioned like the unconditional positive regard, which is one of the 3 conditions of person-centered therapy, which, when you think about it, in the history of the church, was rather destructive, right? There's been articles released on how, person-centered therapy went into convents and houses of formation, and really wrecked some religious orders that I'm not going to mention after the council, right? And just how vicious that was. And I think the trouble with that, and I think we're going to get into the difference here, is like the unconditional positive regard, while it can be really helpful, you have to be very careful, especially as a Catholic, because it really toes dangerously into subjectivity, right? And I think the difference of what I experienced, while I did experience an unconditional love can't be separated from the truth. And I think that's what really sets us apart, in particular as Catholic clinicians, that we can kind of manage that tension, these two things that seem like they should be opposed, but when they're actually held together, I mean, that's the dialectic, right? Um, God loves you just as you are, but you need to change. Like, those things sound like they don't fit, but they do, right? And the same idea, like, I can love you unconditionally, but I'm also going to hold you to a standard. And it's kind of this, I don't expect you necessarily to make that standard today, but I have a hope that you will. And I'm going to hope you to that level by loving you as you progress there. I think Dr. Anna Terruwe and Dr. Conrad Baars really formed the experience that I had in counseling, which was helpful because this clinical psychologist was kind of teaching us, the Franciscan Friars of Renewal, she was teaching us their works over about a 22-week kind of seminar that we would take with her weekly. And I had the benefit of kind of having my own personal study with her in our sessions, which sometimes were 4 hours long. She would meet with me, and then I'd leave, and then the next friar would come in, and she'd do him for another 4 hours. And it was crazy, right? And so it was this really deep dive into this intellectual tradition of these two Catholic psychiatrists that none of us had ever heard of before. And I'm really excited to kind of share with you about them and how their work largely informs how I approach my work as a therapist, but also, most importantly, how I approach the therapeutic relationship itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Launch into it. Tell me
Okay.
about these two people.
Yeah. So, and I know that you've talked about them quite a bit, but just for the sake of anyone who's relatively unfamiliar or looking to learn more. So in America, we really know this Dr. Conrad Baars. So he and Anna Terruwe are both from the Netherlands. Baars, they're both Catholics, and Baars was captured by the Nazis in World War II for assisting downed Allied pilots, excuse me. And he was sent to a concentration camp. I'm terrible with the pronunciation. Not
Was it
Auschwitz.
Buchenwald?
Yes, Buchenwald. That's right. It starts with a B. Which, so the phrase "to each his own" is actually the phrase that they had at that concentration camp. So every time I hear someone say, "Well, to each his own," I'm like, I don't know if we want to promote that philosophy, because that's what they had at the concentration camp. Like, the work will set you free. Like, that was the same kind of like slogan, but at this place, right? So he survived that concentration camp, went to England, and then eventually came to the United States, and then began practicing psychiatry just as he had learned it, right? All the while in the Netherlands, this Anna Terruwe in the 1930s, because of a Redemptorist priest and lawyer and professor that she had, she was really introduced to the works of Thomas Aquinas and how they could apply to the realm of psychiatry, right? And she kind of believed that genuine progress in the science of mental health could not be made without a proper anthropology of human nature, found particularly in what at that time they were calling rational psychology, or the philosophical science which gives a rational explanation for observed mental facts. Right? You have like empirical science, which determines facts and the laws that govern them, but the speculative sciences are going to be more like where we're probing the causes of those facts and how it is that they happen, right? And so she's introduced to Aquinas, who's really already kind of doing a lot of all of this with his own anthropology. And she's writing, and her dissertation in 1949 is about the neurosis and rational psychology. And she's pretty much trying to debunk Freud with his concept of repression being one in which there's an internal struggle between the emotions and like the ego and the id and the superego, right? And she's like, no, Aquinas already did this. And that repression is really just a conflict between the two emotions and the lack of reason being able to guide that, because the one emotion is excessively active to the point of pushing reason out from the emotion's natural desire to be guided by it. So she's doing all of this in the Netherlands, and Baars has no clue. He's in America. He's becoming disillusioned with what mental health looks like in America at this time. And he goes back to the Netherlands to visit some family, and he connects with his cousin, who's a Benedictine monk in the Netherlands. And he gives her a copy of Terruwe's book, which had been published in 1955, called Psychotherapy and Neurosis. Now, this was in Dutch, right? And he reads this book, and he found he just was like converted. And he writes in his biography that many of the observations in psychiatry can be best explained on the basis of Thomistic psychology, right? And he's like, I got to meet this woman, right? And so he begins this relationship with her, and he's traveling back and forth and just learning from her, learning from her. And he says that she taught me many of the things which are ignored in medical school and in psychiatric training that are indispensable to every person entrusted with the well-being of troubled individuals. He said that his education as a psychotherapist began and took over his training as a psychiatrist when and where he met this Dr. Anna Terruwe. So he's in the US, he's out there talking, and now he's trying to republish her works in English, right? And he's going back and forth and meeting her and meeting his client, or excuse me, he's meeting Terruwe's clients. And he writes about this one client that he met, and he found, this is a quote, an inner peace and happiness to enjoy life whose real meaning and purpose this client had learned to appreciate in therapy. And he just never seen anything like it, right? And so he's publishing her dissertation, publishing all these other books, and he needs a moral theologian because Terruwe got into some trouble in the 50s around the book that she had published. And so she was seeing a lot of Jesuit priests and seminarians in the Netherlands and didn't like some of the methods that she was using. And so this got to the Holy Office, which, the CDF has a new name now. I can't quite remember. And they silenced her. And she was never interviewed, was never asked anything about her work, just like done. And she did not see Catholic priests or seminarians for 13 years because the silencing was that all the bishops in the Netherlands were ordered not to employ any mental health professional that were using these methods, and that no seminarian and priest in the diocese was allowed to see a woman. And at that time, she was the only practicing female psychiatrist in the entire country. So it's like, right? Well, then a new cardinal comes in. He's kind of like the primate of the Netherlands, and he catches wind of all this, and he's great friends with Paul VI, because this is like 1968. So he is sending her stuff to Paul VI, talking to her about Paul VI, and it all gets cleared up. She's reconciled, she's redeemed, she's found to be orthodox, like in belief and practices. And she has 2 private meetings with him in 1968, one of which was to offer her support for Humanae Vitae, which had come out that year and was obviously a very controversial document. The Pope went with the minority report on that, as opposed to the majority, which wanted to kind of approve of the use of contraception. And the minority was saying, no, no, no. And Terruwe was in favor of the no, no, no. And in 1971, after Terruwe and Baars spoke at the Synod of Bishops on the priesthood, Paul VI called Terruwe's work, not Baars, but Terruwe, called her work, quote, a gift to the church. And this is something that Baars tells us in his own writings, that this happened. So again, he's here in America, he's speaking, he's writing, and they're writing books together. And one of the cool things is he published her dissertation, in English, and the foreword to that was written by a Dr. Francis Braceland, who was the president of the American Psychiatric Association, and who was a personal physician to President FDR. He's writing the foreword to this woman's book, right? And in that book, in the foreword, he's talking about how this is what we need. This is what we need in order to help preserve the practice of the psychological sciences. He said that it's Terruwe who's responsible for the integration of Aristotelian Thomistic principles into and their psychology with modern psychiatry. Now, I don't know why that didn't like blow up and take off, but it didn't. And so Baars continues to speak and to teach and to see people. And 2 weeks after his last public appearance, he has a heart attack and dies in 1981. And I've kind of observed that, like, when we talk about their methods, it's really just about Conrad Baars, Conrad Baars, Conrad Baars. And Baars is very clear, like, I'm nothing without this woman. Yeah. Like, she taught me everything, right?
Thinking about these theories, it just strikes me that Terruwe and Freud were observing the same thing, right? So logic, like using a logical structure, they're both observing the consequence of what's happening. And, the difference is that Terruwe has an objective structure inside of which to understand that observed phenomenon, right? So, and to use like a logical analogy, Freud is affirming the consequence of what's happening, which produces a cogent argument. The ego, id, the repression. I mean, this whole thing, superego. Like you hear it and it sounds plausible, but it's not actually provable, right? Because there's no thought starting from objective principles by which he comes to those conclusions. He just sort of proposes a model, I'm sure influenced by a handful of thinkers that came before him. that seems to make sense of what's happening, right? But working at it from the Thomistic perspective, with really the anthropology, I think, of Aquinas building on Aristotle, Terruwe has this really objective structure built up through metaphysics into psychology from a philosophical perspective in epistemology, through which to make sense of this same theory. So this is important that both of their theories acknowledge the phenomenon of repression, right? And that's problematic. Because I think some would say, well, repression really doesn't exist, right? You just, like, repression's a good thing because the goal is to not sin or to not do bad or to do good. So it's almost like a total war on sin, meaning it doesn't matter how you get there. As long as you're doing the right thing, you've accomplished the goal. And I think what's being offered here is that what's key isn't the outcome, isn't the changing of behavior, but it's the transformation of the person. So could you talk some about Terruwe's understanding of human emotions based on the thought of Aquinas, and maybe contrast that to Freud's theory?
So Freud's theory, I'm not going to be the strongest person on that to share, but the trouble with Freud, like, he got some things right. I'll give him some credit here and there, and I see that I see that observed in the life of my clients, particularly when it gets into some sexual issues, sexual trauma. I like this idea that you pitched here, Andrew, about the transformation of the person, because, and if we have time, we can get into that. Like, while there is a lot here about repression and the emotions and human anthropology that Terruwe and Baars took from Aquinas, and with the help of moral theologians, Dominican moral theologians mostly, they created this model of treatment for repression. I really find that the transformation occurs through this process of affirmation as well, right? But to answer your question, so 1 Thessalonians 5:23, spirit, soul, body, right? Pneuma, psyche, soma. So pneuma, spirit, a pneumatic gun, right? Like a mechanic uses an air gun to take the bolts off the studs to get your wheel off, right? Soul in Greek there is psyche, okay? And then body, soma, somatic, so psychosomatic reaction, right? Now we're talking some Freudian things here. So this is their understanding of the human person, that these things are all integrated. And I think when you get into Freud, for example, or really just where we are in the psychiatric world, the psychological world, I should say, there's a lot of disintegration, right? And I think you see this in like the gender ideology right now, that there's a separation of body and soul, or like there's not a unity like that we kind of see it. And so you can talk about these things separately and just kind of treat them as like separate things. But for us, it's like, no, we're always working toward wholeness. And that's the word that Paul uses in that line, wholeness and holiness, right? In order to be holy, you got to be whole. And certainly my context, like when I was in this stage of going through counseling, I just wanted to be holy. And I wasn't whole, and I didn't know what it meant to be whole. Nobody told me what it looked like to be whole. I knew what it looked like to be holy. I could just try to do that, right? And it all becomes an act of the will. And it's like, yeah, but I'm doing violence to most of my nature if I'm just pursuing this by willpower alone. And Catechism is very clear on that, quoting Thomas Aquinas, that the perfect human action is one that is made with the emotions and the will. Now, that doesn't always mean that we're listening to the emotions, but the emotions are present, right? So spirit, soul, body, you have like intellect, will, reason. These are like our higher faculties, right? These set us apart from animals. We're not animals, we're humans, right? We share a lot in common with them, but we're not animals. Okay, so speculative knowledge, logic, discourse, all these things, just boom, that's where that's all happening, right? At the level of the psyche, we have the emotions. We have common sense, utility, judgment. These are all kind of phrases that Terruwe and Baars use, borrowing from Aquinas, just forming this anthropology. Memory is all kind of interacting here. And this isn't a perfect like breakdown, right? But for the sake of explanation, I find it to be helpful. Within the emotions, then, they kind of break up two different categories. Thomas Aquinas uses irascible and concupiscible. And it was Catholics were like, concupiscence, scary word. Shouldn't be, right? It's just our natural desire for the good, right? And our attachment for it, right? But it gets us into trouble. Okay, so irascible, we hear anger, right? Oh, that's scary. And then concupiscence. So Terruwe and Baars kind of renamed those to humane for the concupiscible emotions, and the utility emotions, anger. And the idea, again, borrowing from Aquinas, is that the emotions are all reaction or a response to an external sensory stimulation. And I have this internal movement toward it. And the emotions are in response to what I feel or perceive as good or what I feel or perceive as not good. And they would say evil. Now, when we say evil, we're not talking about moral evil. We're talking about like ice cream is good and green beans out of a can is evil, right? Like that's kind of the difference we have here, right? And so when you go through the emotions, I desire ice cream because it's good. Okay. I love ice cream because it's good. And I desire the things that I love. And when I am in union with the object that I desire because I love it, I experience joy. So there's our three emotions, right? Now, the opposite of those, when the good is taken away or in response to an evil, like green beans out of a can, instead of desire, I feel aversion. Instead of love, I feel hate. And I know, like, oh, hate's a strong word. It is, but Paul tells us to love what is good and hate what is evil, right? Like, and the idea being like, if you can't hate well, you can't love well. Like it's okay to hate abortion. It's actually really helpful to hate abortion. Okay, it's helpful to hate things that are evil, moral evil or not. Um, and then the opposite of joy being sadness, right? And sadness is really beautiful because the degree that we're able to allow ourselves to be sad really speaks to the goodness of the thing that has been lost. So, like when someone suffers a loss in their family, particularly a death of a child, and they're really terrified by how sad they are. Like, man, the how sad you are just speaks to the goodness and worth and love that you have for the loss of this child, the loss of this person. So, I mean, let's dive in, right? And I'm going to be with you through that whole thing, but let's not hold back on this sadness because that too is part of being human, even if it's uncomfortable. And that's the thing. A lot of people, I hear them say, well, there's positive and negative emotions. Well, Aquinas doesn't use those and Terruwe Baars don't. They're uncomfortable emotions. I don't like to feel them. But they're neutral, right? They're not charged positively or negatively. The problem is like we treat these uncomfortable emotions as being less valuable, less wanted, but they're really helpful. So let's switch gears, for example, if we can, to the utility emotions, right? Courage and hope. I see a good, but I have to persevere through some struggle to get it. These two work together. The opposite of courage is fear. I see that evil and I can't overcome it. I'm afraid of that evil because it's going to hurt me. So I'm going to, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, whatever, right? The opposite of courage would be fear. The opposite of hope would be despair, right? I don't believe that I will ever overcome this evil. I don't believe that I will ever receive that good. Sometimes despair can be really helpful because sometimes we need to let go of something that we desire. That it's actually not helpful for us to hope in this thing, and that's where reason comes in. I'll get to that in a second. And then you have anger, and anger kind of hangs out by itself. Anger doesn't have an opposite. Anger is a lot of fun. When I was doing my psychological evaluation with Father Benedict Rochelle to enter the Friars, he was a psychologist, and at the end of the exam, he's like, "You got some anger issues." And I got angry. It's like, no, I don't. And he just kind of like looked at me, right, and took some notes. I'm like, oh man, it's not good. But anger is really interesting. So Paul says in Ephesians, right, be angry, sin not. And well, anger is a capital sin. Yeah, it is. Because it's kind of like the hinge, if you will, from which other sins can flow, right? It's capital, the head, right? It's the head. So other things kind of flow from that. Like, but we can be angry really well. We can feel all of these emotions really, really well. Okay. And so then the last part to this, and this is all in the catechism, by the way, like paragraph 1763 through 1803, it's all there. And it's like directly quoting Aquinas. The emotions are made to be guided by reason, not as though reason is a dictator, but it's kind of like a board meeting, and reason is like the head of the board, right? And so I'm on a board, right? Catholic Psychotherapy Association, like first time ever on board, and I'm like really learning a lot about how these things work, and so I think this analogy is helpful. Like everyone's got a seat at the table, and reason's kind of like leading and guiding the whole thing, and reason's listening to what everybody has to say, but reason makes a decision at the end. And this is, I think we're going to get into this here in a bit, rather than telling an emotion, nope, Nope, you're not welcome here. Don't be felt. Nope, that's inappropriate. That's not acceptable. We're not going to do that. Reason's like, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I respect that. I know you really want this thing right now, but it's not what's best. It's not what is the most good, not only for you. I think this is another thing too that can separate us as Catholics. It's not about you and what you want, right? There's a universalization that needs to occur in a mature human being. And so it's not about you. It's not about what you want. It's not about what serves you. It's about the greater universal objective good. And that's the power of reason. A child is naturally self-centered, right? Because they don't have this development yet. It's okay for them to be self-centered. It's important that we slowly, appropriately, at the right amount of time, bring them out of that, but we can't rush them because they're going to hear, oh, I have desires for myself. Those are bad. Don't feel anything. Don't desire anything. Don't get angry. Don't be sad. Because I was told, I was shamed not to, right? But as a child ages, they begin thinking about other people. Well, this is the same thing, right? Reason gets us out of ourself because reason is a universalizing process that gets us from particulars to universals. And so reason comes in, listens to the emotions, but then makes a final decision based on the objective good. This is how it works in a normal, healthy, integrated, functioning person, of which I've met very few. Right?
So we're a body and we have a soul. We're one person, and within that soul, there's a part of it that we is sort of sub-rational, so to speak. There's a part of it that is an experience of this our sensory life, sort of, for lack of better terms, inside of us, whether we're imagining, remembering, feeling, what we're perceiving, sort of knitting our experience together, having an initial or sort of basic judgment about those things. And then we have this rational function of our soul by which we can know the truth and do the good. So that's kind of the basic outline of psychology. So within that framework, then, what does that observation of repression that Terruwe and Freud both have, what's happening within that framework when repression's happened?
Yeah, so repression then for Terruwe, really borrowing from Aquinas and his idea that an emotion can get so strong that it blocks this natural, rational guidance that the emotion needs, that the emotion relies on to be satisfied. Because you can feel all of your emotions, but that doesn't necessarily mean, and this is where reason comes in, that you can give in to them. You can feel your emotions. That's great. We want you to do that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they inform your actions. Right? If I desire something that is sinful, I mean, I'm ultimately desiring something good because that's what happens in sin. But reason tells me, like, well, it's not good. No, it looks good, but it's not. I mean, this is the apple, right? And Terruwe and Baars talk about this too. Like, this is generally going to be a process that's going to occur in those that are more self-aware, are probably higher. If we were to give them in like an IQ test, they'd probably score a little bit more highly. I find this to be the case with obsessive compulsive personality in particular, right? Highly intelligent, highly self-aware, highly in tuned, great emotional intelligence, sensitive, right? And Terruwe talks about this particular population. She said, if there's any population that needs to be healed and served, it's this population, because it's this population that will most greatly benefit the world when they're set free and when they're healed, kind of to use the gifts that they have well. And so repression occurs in that, let's say I have sexual desire. Great, normal, healthy, fine. But I want to be holy, but I want to be chaste, right? And yet I have some distorted thoughts about my sexual desire, namely that it's going to lead me to sin. So now I have desire, but now I also have fear of sin. And every time I feel my sexual desire, I'm afraid of sinning. And I have all these distorted thoughts about my sexual desire, distorted thoughts about virtue, distorted thoughts about holiness, right? Holiness is that, well, I don't have sexual desire, right? I mean, wouldn't that be great? And so every time I have desire, I have fear and I'm afraid of sinning. And so what happens? Rather than reason guiding my sexual desire, and providing me with a proper way to feel that desire and regulate that desire without necessarily acting on it, whether I'm married or not. I mean, I'm married now, but that doesn't mean that I can just have free reign of my sexual desire. I mean, I'm married to a human being, okay, who has their own autonomy and freedom and will and emotions, right? So rather than guiding that by reason, fear gets so strong that it buries that emotion of sexual desire, buries it alive, Terruwe Baars say. Andrew, I'm pretty sure you've never tried to bury anybody alive, but you could probably imagine that if you tried to bury someone alive, what do you think they would do?
They would probably scream.
Yeah, I mean, they would claw their way out to the point of rubbing their fingernails out of their fingers because they're scratched, just viciously trying to get out. I mean, violently trying to get out. And so that emotion of desire is trying to get its way out, and it's trying to get itself out of this blanket of repression so that it can be satisfied by reason, because that's what it was made to do. But fear is pushing reason away because fear is so strong. And the problem here, especially for Catholics, is I end up pursuing holiness not by virtue, which would be the rational guidance of my sexual desire. I end up pursuing holiness by repression. And that's a disaster. And so many of my clients who come with pornography and masturbation, this is so often at the case of it. And it's all true about like coping mechanisms and the nervous system and dopamine. That's all true. And like modern science has given us so much. I wish Terruwe Baars were around for all of this, right? I would love to see how they would incorporate, 800 years of philosophical tradition into what we've really learned about the nervous system over the last 30 years, 10 years even. I mean, it would be phenomenal. So all of that's there too, but then you also have the obsessive compulsive loop, and that's what we're talking about here. That I have a distress, I have sexual desire that causes me distress and fear, and so now I have this discomfort from the thing that I'm afraid of, and I have this discomfort. I'm afraid of sinning. Oh my gosh, and I need a comfort ritual because I've ended up acting irrationally with my sexual desire. In this case, looking at porn and masturbating, because that's not a rational thing to do, especially if it's an addictive behavior, a compulsive behavior. It's not rational. Why? Because it's your fear blocking reason. Now you have this clawed out, viciously angry sexual desire that's now pushing you to compulsive, irrational behaviors. In this case, pornography and masturbation. So now I have this incredible guilt and shame that I've looked at porn and masturbated. And so what do? I go to confession. Well, that's the comfort ritual. Now confession has become the hand washing for the germaphobe. And I never get to the root issue of that I don't know how to feel my sexual desire virtuously and well. I'm afraid of my sexual desire. And this just keeps going and going.
Are there times when the repression is so complete that the person actually accomplishes not acting out sexually?
If the willpower is so strong, but that person's miserable. I mean, they are just white knuckling their way through life.
Yeah. Yeah. So Terruwe Baars propose this idea of affirmation.
Yes.
Right? And we already kind of contrasted that idea from the unconditional positive regard kind of model, and that affirmation is grounded in the truth, and doesn't separate from the truth.
That's right.
So this idea of affirmation of somebody who is whole being fully present and loving you in that space. I was wondering if you could, one, just provide I think a good definition from your perspective of affirmation, and then two, like, what does that look like in the clinical environment?
Yeah. Great question. So you'll hear the affirmation, like emotional affirmation, like emotional affirmation therapy. Like, I can't get behind that phrase, and Baars is very clear about how we can't call it that because that's not the full picture, right? And that affirmation is not a therapy. It's not something that you do. It's something that just is. It just exists. It just kind of, it's not something you do. You just kind of be, right? I know that doesn't make grammatical sense, but like that's what's happening here, right? So affirmation it can take place in different realms: moral, psychological, moral, intellectual, emotional, physical. it all manifests, but it's all part of a whole. There's a priest who wrote a book. He's deceased now. He wrote a book a couple of years ago, and he talks about how like the dad's job is to intellectually affirm, and the mother's job is to emotionally affirm. That is nowhere in Terruwe Baars' writing, because that seems to suggest that emotional affirmation is feminine and intellectual affirmation is masculine, and that's not true. To be emotionally affirmed by a man is really powerful, and I think my clients have that experience regularly, particularly my female clients. Um, I'll get into that in a second. So a definition of affirmation, and you kind of already mentioned this too, it's being fully present to all that is and being able to be moved by the goodness of a thing and allowing how that goodness of a thing and the delight that that causes me, allowing that delight to be manifest so that the object of my delight can also be moved by their own goodness and worth. And Andrew, I'm telling you, man, there's such a deprivation of this on so many levels. Where this is absent, and there's degrees of where this can be absent, right? But Terruwe Baars talk about this consistently, and this is my top experience as a clinician with my clients. You know, they'll call and kind of, well, I've got anxiety, I've got depression, I've got PTSD, and like all those things might be true, but it's usually by the second or third session that they really lock into what we're talking about here, namely having deep-seated feelings of inferiority, inadequacy, low self-worth, low self-esteem, that life, the day-to-day tasks of my life are just too much to bear because I really don't feel like I'm good enough to do it. And I'm trained in EMDR, and we kind of target self-talk, right? These negative cognitions. And it's so often it's I'm a failure, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm incompetent. And there's a component here that I've been unaffirmed, that I haven't had consistently and well affirming people in my life who have communicated to me verbally, non-verbally, emotionally, physically that I am lovable and good. And where that's absent or inconsistent or deprived bears itself out in a lot of woundedness. Because, especially as Catholics, like we want to make ourselves a gift to others in marriage and priesthood, religious life, single life, whatever. As a missionary, but you cannot give what you don't have. And if I've not received the gift of myself from a loving other, then it's all an act of the will. And that's what happened to me as a friar. I willed myself through a life of complete self-gift because I was trying to give something I didn't have. And I had a meltdown and panic attack, thank God.
As you're talking about it, I love it integrates the call of the Catholic mental health professional to the universal call to holiness, right? Because the perfect affirmer is the saint. You know,
Yes.
it's kind of, and I'm beautiful that's the Holy Family. Like Jesus was raised
right
with a sinless woman, and a man who was doing a pretty darn good job affirming him, right?
Yeah.
So I love that integration, but two, it seems to be played out in that even secular psychology recognizes the central role or the most important role of the therapeutic relationship in the outcome of the client.
Absolutely.
But so it kind of unseats the idea that it's just about technique. But I think part of it is the psychology, I think, can reduce it to a neurological kind of a phenomenon, like it's just about attunement. So you accomplish that by the counselor sort of regulating their nervous system. The wholeness of the counselor isn't as important as the sort of physiological state of the counselor. So would you maybe contrast that idea of affirmation with these kind of contemporary ideas that are really kind of in the counseling world right now, the therapeutic relationship, attunement?
That's right. Yeah. So you're speaking to about 45 years of research of what we call common factors, that like all the techniques and modalities, like those are great, right? But at the end of the day, it's the common factors of the therapeutic relationship that account for the greatest amount of positive outcomes in counseling, right? And these are kind of like the personal soft skills that the client experiences within the therapeutic relationship. I think the trouble is when you go to school to become a mental health professional, these things aren't talked about. It's almost as if they expect that you're already an expert at relationships and that you know how to relate with people really well. And that's not the case. right? I remember in training, like in a group therapy class, I remember one of the students, she was not having a good experience, and we were kind of doing a mock group counseling thing, and we were talking about relationships, and we got to her, and she's like, "I don't do any words that end in ships." And I was like, "Well, I don't know how you're gonna do the therapeutic relationship." And then like this whole big thing happened, and it's like, what are we doing here? What are we doing? Right? So when we talk about the differences between affirmation and attunement, like, and again, we've mentioned this before, like we're talking about some philosophical kind of abstract concepts here and Aquinas and everything else. I'm not trying to throw out the advances of modern psychology and the things that we've learned about the brain and the nervous system. I mean, this stuff's fantastic, right? But it can't be at the risk of the fact that, and like Matt Bruinger talks a lot about this, Greg Bottaro talks a lot about this. We are formed by relationships, we're wounded by relationships, and we're healed by relationships. And there's a lot more to a relationship than just attunement and empathy. Certainly not sympathy. Definitely not advice. I don't give advice to my clients. My advice is worthless, right? Like, I offer a heart that is ready to receive and give. It can't be from some ivory tower. Like, I got to get in there with my own heart, my own body, and ask the Holy Spirit to discern in me the unique and hidden goodness in every single person I meet, not just my clients. And this requires a great deal of my own kind of personal self-care, if you will, kind of a trendy buzzword, right? To safeguard my affectivity. So my clients would come in and be like, well, what do I do? I need some homework. I'm like, this isn't CBT. Like, I'm not, you need to learn to stop. I need you to do nothing. I need you to learn how to rest. I need you to sit with a book and a cup of coffee, preferably decaf if you got some substance concerns going on here and dopamine. Like, I need you to sit and do nothing and just learn how to enjoy something again so that you can experience pleasure without guilt and shame, and to allow like all the natural goods that are around us to speak to your own goodness and worth by entering into communion with them. That's not attunement, right? That's so much more. I tell clients, like, here's attunement. I go to a funeral, a wake. A wake's a great example. I go to a wake. I go to the receiving line to greet the family of the deceased person. What's the thing I normally say?
I'm so sorry for your loss. You have
So
my
sorry for your loss.
condolences.
Yeah. What am I apologizing for? Right? I'm so sorry for your loss. Like, they hear that hundreds of times. What do you mean, I'm so sorry for your loss? What does that mean? Right? I'm not trying to put you down. Like, this is just what we said because we don't know what to say, right? I'm so sorry for your loss. What are you trying to communicate there? Are you asking for forgiveness? Oh, what you're trying to say is it hurts you to know that this person who you care about has lost this loved one who's in the casket behind them. And that you're observing or trying to imagine all the range of emotions that they're going through right now. And you want to be able to communicate that, gosh, this is really hard. And I'm also sad. And so, what if you're in that line and the person comes up to you and says, hey man, I mean, this loss for you is nothing in comparison to me, but like, I've been heartbroken. I know you've got 35 people behind me, but can I just tell you a quick little story about your loved one that I'll never forget? I, one time I was at this thing and blah, blah, blah. Because now I'm not saying sorry for your loss. I'm saying like, I also loved this person to a degree that you do too. And I am feeling this loss with you. And I am honored that I can come here and celebrate this life and also grieve with you. That's the difference between attunement and affirmation.
So Terruwe talks about deprivation neurosis.
Yes,
Essentially, the person does not receive the affirmation they needed for their emotions to become whole, to grow, to mature. Um, and so now the person has probably learned to be the person or act the way they need to act via repression.
that's right.
Um, so one of the things happening in the clinical relationship is they're receiving the affirmation from the counselor that they should have or could have or would have received from their parents, in a sense. So what strikes me about this model is that it seems to imply that the emotions are kind of like plants, like they're a little baby seed, and they need sunlight and they need water. And if you give the emotions the right stuff, they end up at the right place. And I would contrast it with a different model where it's like the emotions are like clay, right? And I need to make acts of the will to form those emotions. So it seems to me, and we'll get into in a minute some controversy around the idea of mortification therapy, another kind of clinical modality that Terruwe developed. So one, this idea that the emotions kind of grow up, and affirmation is sort of the stuff they need to do that growing process, right? That analogy seems to be somewhat limited in that we do suffer from concupiscence. So the emotions also need to be sort of formed or directed. So can you talk some about that process, maybe reconciling or integrating those two models of the development of the emotional side of the human?
I love that analogy there that you used the plant. I'm going to use that. I'm going to credit you with that. I think that's fantastic. 100%. That's dead on, spot on. And I know there's going to be folks out there listening like, well, what about the intellectual life? Like we're not denying the need for intellectual formation here. We're just it seems like we seem to have a tendency to overemphasize that part of human development, this intellectual formation, while kind of leaving the emotions just kind of fend for themselves, right? And so that's why we're having this conversation. Like, no, the emotions need their own developmental process as well, and it looks a little different than the intellectual, right? And so as a child learns to feel its emotions, the child needs to be met with acceptance and understanding. And now we have, modern science, co-regulation, and the attunement piece comes in here. Absolutely. It doesn't end with that, right? But that's all a part of it, right? And that the child learns slowly that my emotions are good, even the uncomfortable ones. And that I can feel emotions, and the people that love me are still going to love me, and that there's no emotion that I can feel that's going to make the people that love me not love me. Now, there might be justice and consequences for some of the actions that I choose based on my emotions that I thought were good but weren't good, or when I irrationally used my anger and came in and started yelling and screaming and throwing things, right? Okay, I see that you were really angry, huh? Yeah, yeah, there's a better way, right? Okay. You asked about mortification therapy. Did that answer the question before I move on?
Yeah, I think we got it. Yeah. So what is mortification therapy? What's been the controversy around it? Um, and then what would be, based on your kind of deep research into Terruwe and Baars, kind of uh, a proper understanding of it?
Yeah, so mortification therapy was more than likely the thing that Terruwe was getting in trouble with in the 1950s with the Jesuits. Um, there are people who are far more knowledgeable about that process of what happened with her than I am, particularly Father Jerry Ryan, who wrote his doctoral dissertation in Rome about mortification therapy, largely in response to some critics. The idea with mortification therapy is that when you have all this repression and when you have all this irrational behavior, we have to remember like culpability is a thing, right? And where things become compulsive, where things are addictive, then freedom begins to be taken away. And particularly in the realm of mortal sin, that kind of reduces one of the three conditions of something being a mortal sin, namely that I freely chose this, right? And Catechism is very clear about this. Okay, so the problem becomes because I am so afraid of sin, for example, I repress my emotions. Well, that's not healthy for me, right? And so mortification therapy says, well, we need to kill the excessive fear. That's what the mortification is. We have to mortify the excessive fear. And so the moral laws and rules right now for you in this very particular realm, they don't apply to you. Now, usually the person hears that and they freak out, myself included. I went through this. What? No, like, no, you're not free for morality. You're not free from morality because you're not freely choosing your actions, and only actions are morally evaluated, not emotions. Okay, not thoughts. You're not acting freely because you are pushing yourself using acts of the will. By the way, we were talking about affirmation earlier, and the unaffirmed person doesn't necessarily fall into repression. The unaffirmed person more often falls into pure act of the will, kind of relating and building rapport, right? Because their emotional life is so distant from them or so infantile that they can't bring that with them into their adult relationships because they have these deep-seated feelings of inferiority and inadequacy, everything else. So everything is an act of the will. Repression, on the other hand, is reason and will aren't even really at the field anymore because the excessive repressing emotion is so strong. So mortification therapy says we need to mortify and reduce this repressing emotion so that we can allow the repressed emotion to emerge and be allowed to be guided by reason. So in this case, sexual desire. Okay. Well, if the if I may feel whatever I'm feeling and the rules and the laws don't apply to me right now, and I may act in whatever way I act as I am allowing my repressed sexual desire to emerge, that may lead to some objectively sinful behaviors. So the classic one is the guy that's not looked at porn and not masturbated, but he's terrified of his sexual desire. And he has these awkward relationships with women because he's really uncomfortable around them. And everything's an act of the will and everything's repression. And he's not healthy and he says weird things. And his bishop's like, this guy's a freak. And he's so awkward with women and the ministry's suffering. Okay. He's falling in love with women, obviously talking about priests here, but this could apply to anybody. Well, the mortification therapy says, I need you to feel that desire. And as you feel that desire, some behaviors might emerge that you don't want. And we don't want these behaviors either, but we need to tolerate them for a small amount of time while fear comes down and sexual desire comes up so that reason can meet it. And when that happens, these unwanted behaviors, like looking at porn and masturbating, for example, which might emerge as a guy allows his sexual desires to emerge from the guiding principle of repressive fear, like some crazy behaviors might come out that this guy would never do. But it's because he's never learned to feel his sexual desire. And so now he's totally overwhelmed. And just like an adolescent boy has to learn to feel his sexual desire, which sometime might involve, unfortunately, he might fall into pornography and masturbation, right? Like, okay, remember the hope thing we were talking about later? Like, I don't need you to be perfect now. I need you to hope with me that you will be perfect. And I'm going to meet you where you are right now and accompany you right now. So what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to shame you. You're looking at porn and masturbating? That's a mortal sin. There's no such thing as an automatic mortal sin. It's not possible. You have to meet all the conditions. Missing Sunday Mass is not a mortal sin. It's grave matter. Looking at porn and masturbating, it's grave matter. It's not a mortal sin. There's no such thing. Drives me nuts. Right? But this is the distorted thinking. Okay?
So then in the context of, let's just put flesh on these bones then.
Yeah.
So you're with the guy, you're his counselor now.
Yep.
So is the instruction, when you have those feelings, just allow yourself to act on them? Or is the instruction to try not to do it, but just try not to exercise fear on the emotion?
Yeah, I think it's a both and, which I know gets tricky, and I think this is where people get hung up on what this is. And just as a quick aside, like Terruwe Baars didn't just make this all up. Like they consulted with the best moral theologians in America at this time: Father Jordan Allman, William May, Monsignor William Smith, the Archdiocese of New York, who I had the opportunity to live with. I mean, what a man. And even currently, Father Wojtek Gierta, who's a Polish Dominican, who's a theologian of the papal household. I mean, he wrote an amazing article on Terruwe Baars just a year or two ago, right? And I've been working with him, collaborating on some publishing that I'm hoping to do with him. Like, these are the best of the best. And if these guys are all signing off on this, we need to listen to that. I mean, these are Dominican OP moral theologians who are all saying, like, yeah, Terruwe Baars are accurately applying Aquinas to this treatment. Okay. So it's going to be a little both and, right? I want you to feel that emotion. There are going to be some behaviors that may emerge from that, and we're going to tolerate those for now. Because what's more important is that you are allowing yourself to feel your emotion and to guide it by reason instead of by fear. And the problem is, and I mean, this is so, I mean, it's razor thin here. And I think that's when the church does its best work, when it's teetering on the edges of heresy, right? Like we're just shooting it right down the middle here, even if it's the thinnest line we're walking, right? Like I'm not encouraging you to sin. I'm encouraging you to feel your natural desire. And some behaviors that would ordinarily otherwise be called sinful may emerge from that, but you are not free for morality because these behaviors are still behaviors that are not fully rational.
Hmm.
Okay. And only behaviors that are free can be moral, right? Because if I'm engaging in an action that's not free, well, God in his mercy isn't going to hold us to the fire on that. And that's why that's one of the conditions for mortal sin. You have to be free to do it. And that's the realm of a moral theologian and a spiritual director and a mental health professional working together, like kind of determine like, well, what's the degree of freedom here? What's the degree of culpability, right? So it's a both and. The goal is not to be like, all right, man, hey, you're going to look at porn and masturbate. All right, let me know how that goes. No way. It's you're going to feel your sexual desire and you're going to tolerate all of the discomfort that that causes you so that you can learn to feel it healthily and well. And as you do that, then all of these unwanted behaviors of saying awkward things, uncomfortable things to women, staring at a woman's breasts. I knew a guy that was his irrational behavior. He was so terrified of his sexual desire, he could not stop looking at women's breasts, right? And he went through mortification therapy and he's doing great.
So the instruction is use choose to feel, essentially. So the rational act in the moment of, for lack of a better term, temptation, is to choose to keep your perception on the on the feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, because the feeling is neutral, but you believe that that feeling is automatically sinful,
Yeah. So
which
it's a
then
bit of,
creates fear.
it's kind of
Go ahead.
like an exposure therapy almost.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you mentioned a period of time in your experience, like, is that we're talking like a week? We talking a month? We talking 6 months? We talking 6 years? Like, what does that process
Yeah,
typically look like for
so
someone?
I think it comes in stages. So as I think about it for myself, like the first couple of weeks were really intense, but then it very quickly began to reduce, right? And um like if I think about pornography, masturbation in my own life, like that was a struggle for me as a teenager. In religious life, never. Never. After religious life, never. Mortification therapy, that's when it started. And it was very quick because it began to integrate and regulate, right?
So we're talking maybe like a month where it's maybe acute, and then a
Yeah, I mean,
few months as it
tapers.
sort of goes back. So
Hmm.
when I first read Bars, I have to admit, I felt a little powerless, right? Because so many of our modern approaches, I'm sort of seated in the driver's seat, and I can fix myself by learning and applying certain techniques, kind of the two horsemen of Gnosticism and Pelagianism, right? But there's something about Bars that we're sort of power. Like, I might have no one in my life capable of affirmation, right? And there might not be a single therapist licensed in my state who knows anything about this. Or if I do, it's going to be like finding a needle in a haystack. Um, so I think when people hear these ideas sometimes, like, well, that sounds really nice. But now I just feel like there's nothing I can do about my problems because there's no one here to affirm me. So what would you say to someone who feels like they're in that space?
You know, Andrew, that I mean that my clients say that to me, right? Um, you're the only affirming person in my life. Well, I'm not going to be the last one. I'm a model for, you know, what to expect, right? So in in response to that question, what do I do? Remember, we talked about that earlier at the top of the podcast. Like that's part of the problem. We just think that this is something that we can do, we can achieve. And then there we go. Now we're getting utilitarian. Now we're getting productive. Now we're getting, it's all about what I can achieve, what I can do. No, that's the problem. This has to be received. And okay, it goes back to this problem. Well, I don't have anyone in my life who I could say is authentically affirming. Okay. Well, Baars and Terruwe are very clear on this. It's creation. It's natural goods. It's literature, philosophy, art, going on a hike, spending time in creation, in nature, right? And St. Paul tells us it's like all of this reveals to us the Creator, right? Because it's all made to lead us back to, as I said before, the primary affirmer of our being, who is God the Father. And all of these things are kind of stepping stones to that. God first as the lover of our entire selves. And then from that flows everybody else, right? But as we're trying to go through this experience of being affirmed, we can't affirm ourselves. I mean, that's just a complete backwards way of thinking. And we do that. We try to affirm ourselves, or we do affirmation to somebody else. And it's not a button that you can push. It's not a lever that you can pull, right? It's something that's natural and spontaneous. Like the natural and spontaneous movement of I'm watching a movie and all of a sudden I start crying. Why? Because I was moved by something that was true and good and beautiful. And that can look a lot of different ways. And it doesn't have to just be something that's Catholic, for example, right? Because there's plenty of truth, goodness, and beauty outside of something that's labeled as being Catholic or not, right? Music. I mean, we need to be in union with things that move us. And the experience of being moved and the pleasure that that causes us, that tells us that we are lovable and good. And we experience ourselves as being lovable and good in connection and in response to something else, like a child in response to an affirming parent. I'm experiencing myself as lovable and good because I'm experiencing the pleasure that this other person is causing me. And that pleasure in this case with the parent, for example, is that they're delighting in me. They're with me. They're tender with me, right? So we can have experiences of this with the natural created goods. And then I also tell my clients, we need to pray for the Lord to send people into your life who are affirming. But I need you to be open to that. I need you to be out there looking for it. And it might be a permanent relationship. I had one client that went and she came back and she said, it was the hostess at a restaurant that I went to. And I'm like, excellent. Like, this is going to be great, right? And she's like, I wasn't expecting it, but she was just so warm and kind and genuine and sincere and interested in me. And she looked me in the eyes and she even lightly touched my arm as she was helping me find a seat. I was like, wow, what was that like for you? I felt loved. Yeah. Yeah. More, more. Be open to more of that. But we move so fast. We're not present to these moments, these encounters. The hostess who seats us, what is that, a 7-second exchange? Maybe. But my client slowed down enough, which requires changing a lot of things in our lifestyle in order to be receptive to these moments.
As you're talking, I can't help but think about prayer, right? That God affirms us in prayer. But a lot of us are praying, but maybe not experiencing that affirmation.
Yes.
So it
Yeah.
seems to be that there's, whether it be a posture to enter prayer with, or maybe a way to pray by which to receive the affirmation God's offering us in prayer.
Mhm.
Could you give some guidance on that?
Yeah. So I particularly like to pray with scriptures that talk about trust and surrender and safety and security, right? Because these are very childlike qualities that we, in theory, should and would feel in relation to caregivers, right? I can trust in you. I can surrender. I can believe. I can let go because I'm safe and secure. You are my comforter. You are my rock, right? The Psalms, Isaiah, just filled with this stuff. The Book of Wisdom, just so much on this, right? And if I'm in that posture, I feel safe. I feel loved. I feel cared for. I feel seen and known and heard and understood. And then that experience of allowing the Father to delight in us, and also the experience of the Father's mercy. We are so harshly critical of ourselves, and we're harshly critical of others. We're not very loving. The measure that we can love others is really the measure that we love ourselves. And most of us don't love ourselves well enough, right? That's why we can't say anything good about ourselves, right? So it's the experience of God's mercy coming to the Father and like, man, I messed that up. Or, hey, here's all my sins from the past. Remember those? Thank you for bringing me here to this day.
When I was in graduate school, my spiritual director, wonderful priest of the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, Father Joe Moriarty, he said, I was discerning out, and I had finally let the voice of the Lord be in my heart, and was listening to it. And Father Joe looked at me and said, "You know what, Andrew?" He said, "What's going to change you isn't when you fall in love with someone. It's when you realize somebody's falling in love with you." That line has so penetrated my life since. And I remember when my wife and I were falling in love, I'm way over intellectual. The ratio is just way too big in my head, and all the emotional stuff is way atrophied. It's I'm I use this image. I'm like the weightlifter who always skips leg day. And my emotions are the skinny little legs hiding in sweatpants. And my rational brain is the big upper body, and, but I just remember the lesson in God's love that I received from her when we were dating. I could have studied and read books my whole life and never known love that way. People hearing this conversation right now might be thinking, I need to go to counseling. And I specifically need this kind of affirmation approach. Are there is there a list, these are the counselors that know this crap and use it? Or are there certain, maybe little, because counselors typically have a little profile and they'll talk about modalities or whatever. Are there certain key words or things that might set people off to think, this person might, this Catholic counselor might be using some of this approach?
Yeah, so some people just put Terruwe Baars, I think CatholicTherapist.com has that as an option, which I think is great. I think when you're looking for terms around affirmation, attachment is going to be really big. Repression stuff, if you see people listing themselves as DBT, that's really going to be a lot of what we're talking about here in the realm of a philosophical approach to the emotions, dialectical behavioral therapy. I think anyone so Matt Bruninger does a great job. Matt and I went to college, so now he's this superstar, and I'm just kind of I remember when, and he's changed my life in college. I mean, just unbelievable. And I was a seminarian in college too, and he was not. And he talks about this all the time, just the relationship in the counseling room, and how so much of that happens. So folks are out there looking for clinicians, and they're, we have to put our modalities and techniques and everything else, because that's what people Google sometimes. A lot of it is just SEO stuff, really. But you want to find someone who's talking about the power of relationship and the power of the transforming element of a relationship, right? That you want to find that kind of soft language. And when you get in there with somebody, you want the tenderness and sincerity, and you want humanity, you want humor, you want connection, right? You want rapport. And I have so many folks come in and they're my therapist had great techniques and modalities and everything else, but I just didn't have the relationship, right? And sometimes I'm I don't really have the techniques, but I can offer you a relationship, right? I know them, but you're asking me about Freud and stuff. I can tell you very little. You probably know more about Freud than I do, right? Because it's this is the DSM. Let's do a second episode on the DSM. I don't understand how the DSM helps therapists build relationships with their clients.
It just helps them bill insurance.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Right. And it's a medical model, and we don't operate from a medical model. I need to know the DSM.
It's not medical. it's phenomenology that's pretending to be medical.
Yeah, I mean that's
There's
fair
nothing
too,
scientific
right?
about it.
But it's like that thing gets in the way of my building relationships. Why? Because it pigeonholes the person to a cluster of symptoms. Then I apply. No, I'm not saying it's totally worthless. It's a helpful doorstop, But apart from that, like I don't know how it helps me do the thing that I do best, form a relationship. Okay, so anything that detracts from that needs to be put secondary. I'm not saying throw it out, but it cannot take the place of the thing that's most important, the relationship. And my having the vulnerability with my client, like I have teenage girl clients. I mean and like I have to find within me the comfort and the confidence to be able to love them well. And I'm some 41-year-old dude, like, and I need to do that prudently and appropriately, but like I need to reveal to them. Like I was finishing with a teenage client, and this is our last session. I started crying. I didn't want to see them go, but like they were great. Everything was good, and I'm like crying with this 16-year-old girl. And I go back to supervision and with everybody, and I'm mortified. And everyone's just laughing at me, And it's like you showed her how to be sincere.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, Jeff, thank you so much.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing yourself. Thank you for sharing your journey, more about Terruwe Baars. In the show notes, we'll link previous episodes if people want to dig into more of this stuff. So you have started a counseling practice, your partner in Harmonia Counseling. We'll put the link down there. What states are you licensed to practice in?
Virginia, unfortunately. Only Virginia. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm sure God's got some people from Virginia listen to this who can work with Jeff. You can also find Jeff. He's got an Instagram, the Disc Health Counselor, and a YouTube channel where he's got some, I think you have in there some readings of some of Terruwe Baars' works.
That's right.
I'll also link the Catholic Psychotherapy Association and your great articles from Integradus, their journal. So all that will be down in the show notes, including the quotes from the Catechism we referenced. So please check those out. Any last words, Jeff?
I'm just so moved to be with you, man. It's so good. I mean, you and I connected because I was Google searching people that knew about Terruwe Baars and found you several years ago. And I'm so, thrilled to be here with you. And gosh, your presence is so, tenderness is really moving to me. So thank you. Thank you for bringing me on. And just, I feel like I met a brother today.
Yeah, me too. God bless everyone. Thanks for joining me on Physically Spiritual. If you want to support the show, you can become a patron on the Apostle app by going to physicallyspiritual.com. You can follow me on Substack at becominggift.com. I've been your host, Andrew Reinhardt. God bless everyone.